Hey there, it's Silver. This is Jagged Alliance 3. So this one was a bit of a surprise for a lot of people when it was announced because we haven't had a mainline Jagged Alliance game in quite a while. The last one, the mainline entry, was Back in Action, which was in 2012. So it's been 11 years since we've seen like a main numbered entry, and to be fair, Back in Action itself was technically a remake of Jagged Alliance 2, which came out in 1999. So yeah, this is definitely a series that's been around for a while, but has also been dormant for a really long time. So what is Jagged Alliance? Well, it's a strategy RPG. It's basically a mercenary simulator, or a mercenary company simulator. In this case, the story is that there's this sort of island nation, and its president has been kidnapped by a sort of up-and-coming coup sort of force called the Legion. And it's your job as the leader of this mercenary company to hire various mercs and try and take control of the country back from the Legion, as well as get a hold of its diamond mines and some other important assets like that, and eventually find and free the president. So obviously the first thing you got to do is hire some mercs, and this is a very open-ended game, although you do have an end goal to find and rescue the president of this country. How you actually go about doing that is kind of all up to you, because the world map is quite a large sort of tile-based map, and every tile on the map is actually explorable. So as you sort of venture along each tile in the sort of satellite view, you can then zoom in, and actually each one of those tiles is a map that you can explore on foot. And you've got to hire some mercenaries, because you don't actually have a character yourself. You're sort of the unseen leader of this company, so you got to hire mercs to actually do all the work. And the cool thing about the mercenaries you can hire is that they're not like randomly generated people with various different like stats and things. Instead, they're all set people with a set voice actor and a set personality and things like that. So even though there are a bunch of them, they're not like proc-gen characters based on a template. They are actually characters. And in fact, some of these mercenaries have been in previous Jagged Alliance games as well. So a very important part of what you're doing is managing your funds, because of course you're hiring mercenaries, which means you got to pay them. No character in this game comes for free. And the way that it works is you contract them out for a specific length of time, and if you're able to contract them out for a longer period of time at once, you save money by doing that, because well, you'll find that the length of time matters a lot, and it doesn't scale linearly, basically. So like you can go up to 14 days out at a time. You can hire people for 14 days, that's the max, and you'll notice that 14 days, the cost for that is not exactly twice as much as 7 days. It's actually less than twice as much as 7 days. So if you have the money, it's better to contract them out for a longer period of time at once, because it saves you on the per day cost. But of course, that is determined by how much money you happen to have at the time. You may not be in a good enough place to do that, and there are a whole bunch of different ranks of mercenaries that you can hire. Higher ranked mercenaries come at a higher level by default, so you don't have to level them up as much. They also tend to have better equipment and higher skills and higher stats and things, but of course they also cost a lot more to hire. My personal recommendation is to start out with 4 mercenaries, because that's a pretty good number that strikes a balance between not being too expensive to start out with, and also enough people to actually survive several battles with, because you will be outnumbered in most battles. You know, you'll be facing off against like 8 to 12 people in a lot of battles, so there's no way you're going to have enough mercenaries in a company, and in fact you can only have, I think, 6 per squad total anyway, so you are going to be outnumbered most of the time, but you still want to have a good enough number of them to not get constantly surrounded. You gotta be able to at least cover your corners and things in combat. And each merc will have not only a set of stats that determine their various attributes, like strength is how much stuff they can carry, and of course their health, how much maximum health they have, and all those sorts of stats, but also skills in various different disciplines. So you've got like marksmanship, mechanics, medical, explosives, things like that. And the idea is you really don't want too many all-rounders, because you want several people that are really specifically good at one thing and can do that one thing better than everyone else. Maybe having 1 or 2 all-rounders is still useful, but you want a specialized group so that each squad of mercenaries can handle the various different scenarios they may be presented with and actually have a well-rounded team. Personally, I recommend starting off with a marksman so that you can actually hit things, a medic so that you can heal people after battle, a mechanic so that you can keep your gear repaired, because guns can jam and armor can break and stuff like that, and you want to avoid that if possible, and an explosives expert, because the explosives are just a very powerful, useful tool to have have on hand because the maps are actually destructible. So with explosives, you can break down buildings and destroy walls and eliminate enemy cover, basically. But also, you'll find that mines are a problem. There are a lot of areas on the map that are filled with mines, and having an explosives expert allows you to defuse those mines so that you can actually go through those areas safely, as well as when enemies use timed explosives in combat, like pipe bombs, you actually have a chance to walk up to the pipe bomb and defuse it with your explosives expert so that it doesn't blow up your whole team, which is always nice. And then once you've got your team, you'll be presented with the satellite view, and time constantly moves while unpaused on this view at a specific rate pretty fast, and the satellite view will show most of the islands that you can access in red, which shows they're controlled by the Legion. And you just walk from place to place and deal with whatever it is you come across. Sometimes you'll find nothing, just an empty square. To be fair, none of the squares are actually empty in this game. Like I said, they all have something that you can explore and find within them, but they don't all have events that happen when you come across them. Some of them are just like quick explorable locations, kind of like the Fallout 2 map, having some of its areas being just like, you know, little lootable locations and places for medicine plants and some other stuff like that. But otherwise, you're also looking for settlements, because these are going to be filled with civilians and shops and things like that you want to protect. And the idea is you want to get control of this island back from the Legion, so you're going to want to liberate all of these settlements and actually train up their militias and stuff to be able to protect themselves. Whenever you cross onto an occupied square, you'll be able to deploy in that square with your team and actually come across the enemies and fight them. And if you're able to kill all the enemies on that square, then you'll liberate it, at least temporarily, and gain control of it. The enemy can take it back, by the way, and there are several forts and things on the map that will actually send out enemy patrols in order to attack settlements and take back squares and things. If an enemy goes across a square with nothing on it, they will automatically take control of it and it will turn back red again. But if they come across one of the cities or mines that you've taken, then you actually will need either some militia or some sort of defenses left behind, or you can actually go there yourself and defend it by hand. You can also intercept the groups before they reach that settlement and fight them away from the settlement if you want. This can be kind of a double-edged sword. It's not as good as fighting them in the city, because the city is going to have a lot of cover and a lot of places for you to dig in and actually repel the invaders. And also, if you have any militia or defenses, they'll help you in the combat. You can also get things like mounted guns and stuff to help you out. But that also can cause collateral damage, and there's always a chance that civilians can get shot and stuff too during battles, and that will decrease the area's loyalty to you because people don't like being shot. So sometimes you want to actually intercept them and fight them away from the city where there's no chance of collateral damage. You have this operations menu that you can go to from the satellite view at any time you're not currently engaged in a battle, and the operations menu is just stuff you can do there. So you've got things like healing your party members with your doctor character, or repairing your equipment with your mechanics-focused characters. You can also train militia, like I mentioned. In order to do this successfully, you need characters with a high leadership stat. You can choose up to 2 of them, I believe, and the higher their leadership stat is, the quicker the training is done, and you can train more people, because everything takes time in this game. The time is always ticking, and settlements are always changing hands, and patrols are always moving and stuff like that. You want to make good use of your time. So having a sort of efficient training regiment with a really high leadership character can make sure you have a really good defense at all of the locations that need defending, like diamond mines and cities. Also important to being a company leader, of course, is to get all kinds of resources. You will find loads of loot and stuff all over the place that you can take with you, although you can't really sell most things. So if you've got like a whole bunch of guns from enemies that you've felled, you can't sell those to a market or anything, but you can break them apart for scrap, and this scrap is extremely useful, so it's still worth doing that. You will also automatically strip out any ammunition that's left in them and add it to your stockpiles. Something that's really useful is individual characters don't have to carry ammo in their own pockets in their backpack, because every character has a limited number of slots depending on their strength stat. And you, of course, can fill this with like medical supplies, grenades, extra weapons to switch to in specific scenarios, things like that. But the ammo pool is actually sort of centralized, so you don't have to actually put ammo in each character's pockets, basically, which is a nice little quality of life feature. And there's actually quite a few different ammo types, and you can choose whenever you load a weapon to load it with a specific type if you have multiple. So you might have like match ammo, which is slightly more accurate, or you might have armor-piercing ammo, which has obvious benefits. But as you're exploring around, you'll also find medicine sometimes, both in the form of harvestable herbs as you're exploring around wilderness areas, and also you'll just find stockpiles of medicines in like enemy chests and things. If you raid an enemy base, you might find some sort of medicine stash somewhere, which is always useful. This stuff is, you need it. You need a lot of it, because anytime someone takes very much damage in battle, they get wounds, and wounds reduce their maximum health, and eventually they'll gather so many wounds that they just will have tiny amounts of health left, and almost anything will take them down. So you need to heal those wounds. Now, the wounds do heal over time, but it takes a very long time to do so, and most of the time you don't have that kind of time to wait around and do nothing, because stuff around you is still happening. So having a doctor or a medical expert on hand with a very high medical skill allows you to use this medicine resource outside of combat to heal wounds much more quickly. So you can treat people that way, and usually one doctor or one medical character can treat like 3 people at once, so you can treat up to 3 people at a time. And you can also have a first aid kit that you bring with you in battle, and people with a high medical skill can use the first aid kit to heal a small amount of health from injured people. It doesn't generally take away wounds. You have to do that with the medicine resource outside of battle, but it's still very useful. And also, if someone goes down, they have a chance of actually dying every turn, and if a character dies, that's it, they're gone. You lose them forever, so you do want to keep them alive. And if someone goes down in battle but isn't actually dead yet, you can use the first aid kit to stabilize them. So you can revive them basically with a tiny amount of health and then try and get them away from the battle to keep them safe. But every time you use the first aid kit, it loses some percentage durability basically, and you actually you just right click on it and use your medicine resource to refill it to get its durability back. And then you also have the parts. These are just random scrap bits and bobs that you'll find all around the place. You'll find all sorts of harvestable salvage in the world, as well as scrapping unused equipment and stuff allows you to get parts. You need parts for a couple different things. One of them is just for repairing stuff. Any of your mechanics-focused characters can use these parts to repair all of your party's gear, because it will all degrade over time. Weapons degrade after being shot, armor degrades after taking hits, and things like that. And eventually, they stop providing protection, or they can jam in combat. Your weapons can actually jam, and that always sucks when it happens, because you line up a perfect shot and then you jam and you can't actually fire at all, and your character has to take an entire turn's worth of time to unjam a weapon. So you ideally don't want that to happen, so you keep your weapons maintained, keep them in good condition. Also, weather, interestingly enough, affects condition. If it's like storming outside while you're fighting, your weapons will degrade much faster. Probably to represent like mud and water and stuff getting in there and just messing everything up, so you got to be careful about that. But also there's a pretty in-depth weapon customization system, which I didn't expect to see. You can inspect any of your currently held weapons, and you get a whole bunch of different slots that you can use these parts to craft modifications for, like foregrips for better accuracy or scopes for longer range and things of that nature. You can have all sorts of different things attached depending on the weapon type, and this allows you to heavily customize your weapons and actually want to keep them in good condition, because you've put a bunch of resources into making them better, into improving them in different ways. And you'll also sometimes find weapons in the field that have been modified by the enemies, as well as some merchants will sell weapons that are already pre-modified. Combat is the main thing you're doing in this game, aside from exploring, and it is a pretty in-depth combat system that works really well. It is like a classic, almost XCOM-like combat system. If you've never played a Jagged Alliance game before, that's the closest thing I would probably compare it to. You have a lot of options in combat. You've of course got the ability to move around, which is important, but you've also got different stances you can be in. You can be standing, crouching, or prone, and these obviously affect how easy it is for you to get hit by enemies. Any of your characters that are standing around at the end of a turn, they will be shot. So the AI is pretty good at finding characters that are just standing there and deliberately going after them exclusively. So you really want to keep your characters down and in cover at all times, because enemies are good at tearing them apart if they're exposed. There's also a cover system. When you move up against a wall or anything that provides some protection, you'll see a half shield or a full shield to determine how much cover you get. There's also a sort of red broken shield, which I think is meant to mean the cover is fragile, and if it's shot too much, it'll break. And when you're aiming at an enemy, you get a choice of several different types of shots to make. You can choose to target things like their torso, which gives you the highest hit chance because it's the biggest place to hit, but also only does kind of middling damage and is one of the places that is the most armored oftentimes. If anyone's wearing like a flak jacket or some sort of bulletproof vest or something, then it'll show up, and you might need a very high caliber weapon in order to actually penetrate that protection, but it'll show you whether or not the weapon you're using is capable of going through their armor or not, so you know what to hit. You can also target their legs, which can be really important to do against melee enemies because it will knock them down and prevent them from reaching your characters and like knifing them or whatever they're about to do. You can also hit people in the arms, which has a lower hit chance but will make them inaccurate. This is especially useful against like sniper rifle users and things like that because it'll just knock their aim all over the place. And you can of course hit the head as well, which does the most damage of everything but is a very low hit chance in comparison to everything else because it's such a small target. While you're aiming, you can right-click the mouse to actually make the character use more AP per shot. Every character has a certain amount of AP that they'll get per turn, which you can use for everything from movement to firing, and you can choose to expend more AP to aim more precisely. And you can aim like 3 or 4 levels total, depending on the type of weapon you're using and what sort of attachments it has and things. And each level will, of course, take more AP, but will be more and more accurate. And you don't actually know the hit chances in this game. It's clearly balanced around you not knowing. It doesn't tell you. Your characters give you a bit of a hint. They'll say like, you know, I have a good shot, or there's no way I'm going to hit that, or something like that whenever you aim, so you know whether or not they kind of are in a good position. There's also a range indicator at the bottom of the aiming interface, which shows you if the enemy is within that weapon's optimum range or not. So you have a fair amount of context in between the range indicator and how much line of sight your character has and what they say when you aim and things like that to be able to determine whether or not you're likely to hit an enemy, but you're not shown a specific percentage. There is actually a mod on the workshop available that the developers themselves made that shows you the hit percentage if you want to know that. I used it just to see what it was like, and it changes the balance a little bit. You can see why the game is balanced around not automatically knowing. It makes the firefights a lot more chaotic if you don't see the exact numbers, which I'm pretty sure is the point, but I wanted to use it just for the video to try out the mod support and just to see what it was like. And yeah, I definitely see why they didn't go with that, but it is a useful feature to have, and the fact that it's a mod means it's an option that you can choose to activate if you want, which is always nice to have. When characters level up, they can choose a perk from a perk tree, and the number of trees available to them is determined by their stats. So if they have a high health stat, then they'll have various health perks available. And if they have a particularly low dexterity, then all the associated perks with that will be grayed out, and they won't be able to get them. The stats will raise on a character just by doing things. So if you run a whole bunch, you'll get extra dexterity. If you take a couple of hits, you might have your health raise. If you get some really accurate shots, your marksmanship will go up, things like that. All of your stats and skills are raised just by using them, basically. Although you can also find some single-use magazines that will raise a specific stat for whoever reads it by 1 point. And there are 3 tiers of perk for each stat, a bronze, a silver, and a gold, and you need a certain amount of each one previously and a higher stat in order to continue up the chain all the way to gold perks. And some of the perks are passive and give you just some sort of benefit by having them, like a 10% increase to your maximum health or something like that. Actually, it might be 20%. And some of them are active abilities that you can use in battle, like a special type of suppressing fire that you can use to prevent enemies from moving, or the ability to make specialized explosives every certain number of hours so that you can have some very powerful shaped charged explosives to use in battle that affect a specific cone, so you have a lot more control over where the damage is done. Your characters will also just get tired over time, and they'll get less AP as long as they're tired. You also get less AP if you're suppressed. And if you're using an automatic weapon, you have the chance to use a single shot, which is very accurate, like a 3-shot burst, which is less accurate but does more damage if they all hit, or just a full auto spray, which uses a ton of the ammo out of your weapon, so you're going to have to reload sooner, and is not very accurate, but it can suppress enemies and prevent them from moving around very much. So you may want to have a sort of character with something like an AK-47 or something like that on the high ground to just spray down randomly and suppress people, and to keep them pinned down for your more accurate characters to better place their shots. I mentioned diamond mines, and those are very important because, of course, you need money constantly, and the best way to get money is to take over diamond mines. There are several of them around the map. All you gotta do is go to them, and they're each defended by usually a pretty large group of enemies, but if you're able to get rid of them all, then you gain control of the mine. And, of course, the enemy will try and retake these, so you do want to defend them with militia and stuff. But the diamond mines will provide you a constant income depending on the loyalty of the nearest settlement, because the idea is they're producing diamonds for that settlement, and the more the settlement likes you, the more of a cut they give you, basically. You'll also sometimes find some diamond shipments that start going from some place on the map over to a port And if you're able to intercept the shipment in time, you can defeat the convoy of enemies and actually take the diamonds for yourself and get a ton of cash all at once, which is super useful, but they are usually very well defended, and if they make it to the port, then they disappear entirely and you have to wait for the next shipment. So there's something that you want to position yourself carefully for, and this is why you really need more than one team of mercs. You'll start with just the one because that's all you can afford, but eventually after you take some mines and get some better income and stuff, you'll need to actually branch out and hire more mercenaries in multiple different squads that you can move around separately, because one squad just can't be everywhere at once. You're going to need more than one to get better coverage of the map and better defend important areas and all that stuff. So eventually this becomes a very logistically focused game where it's about taking and controlling and protecting various bits of the map with several different squads of hired mercenaries in order to just expand outwards and keep taking territory and keep the territory you have taken defended and all that stuff. So yeah, it becomes a very large scale game after a while. You'll start out with just that kind of like old school CRPG feeling almost because you have just the one party, but eventually you can have a whole bunch of squads of mercenaries under your control. There are also various side quests and things. Pretty much all of the towns will have some important people that have things to say to you, and these are important side quests not only because they can sometimes give you some exclusive gear or a bunch of valuable things to sell like sapphires and diamonds and things, but also because they can unlock some NPCs with some useful services for you, including healing and some scrapping and other stuff like that, but also they tend to give you lots of opportunities to make decisions to affect the loyalty of that particular place. So like I mentioned earlier, you need high loyalty to get the best result from your diamond mines, so you want to keep these settlements happy by actually solving their problems for them and making them trust you as mercenaries instead of fear you. So overall, I would say Jagged Alliance 3 is a very, very good return to form for the series. It's got its problems, it's not without its flaws, it's a little bit buggy, it does have some weird behavior when it comes to selecting your entire squad and then interacting with something. You'd expect that it would automatically choose the character best suited to interact with that thing, and it does sometimes, but not always. Like if you have your entire squad selected and you choose to disarm a mine, for instance, you would expect that it would choose your highest explosive skill character automatically, and like half the time it does, and the other half you blow your entire team up because it chose your medic or something for some reason. I don't know why it does that, but that needs to be fixed. And also occasionally the AI can bug out a little bit and do some very strange behaviors like running in circles or just not being able to follow you through a very easily followable path, and you have to kind of go back for them and get them to sort of get the program and follow you around. So there's occasional jank here and there with some of the systems being a little bit underbaked, a little bit odd and buggy sometimes, but I still think for the most part the game is pretty polished, and I know that's something that people were afraid of because this is not made by the original developers of the Jagged Alliance series. This is made by Hamamont Games, the people that make the Tropico games, which are pretty interesting sort of Banana Republic simulators, but this is a little bit out of their wheelhouse in terms of what they usually do, so it's interesting to see that, in my opinion at least, they've done a really good job, and this is a very solid return to form for fans of Jagged Alliance, and if you're just a fan of strategy RPGs in general and you've never played one of these games, this is a great one to start with because it's got a lot going for it. If you can see through some of its jank and some of its flaws, there's a really good time to be had here, and in fact you can also play the game in co-op, which will probably increase the fun factor for a lot of people by a ton. And of course there's all that modding support with a built-in mod browser in the game and Steam Workshop support from the get-go, so that means hopefully we'll see some really cool mods soon too, as people sort of sink their teeth into the tools and get used to developing for it. So yeah, definitely a recommend on this one. It's a nice surprise to see a very old but sort of venerated niche series come back and have such a good entry. So that's my current take, at least, on Jagged Alliance 3. I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page so that you can go and check it out yourself. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.